Hi folks, you were Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how Soros-backed or international, particularly Jewish NGO-backed district attorneys, public prosecutors, those sort of people in the United States and others are busily going about what they call justice reform, but in reality it's to spread as much discord and disharmony and conflict and social division in white Western society as they possibly can. And this was an old Soviet trick back from the Cold War days. They used to try on this sort of stuff. But let's have a little look at this, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue all across the United States and indeed elsewhere in the Western world. So we need to understand that that really what's happening is radical globalist funded and globalist ideological hacks and goons are being pushed into the legal system all over the Western world, and they are causing many problems. And we're going to have a look at those sort of problems now, and indeed what they're doing and how they're going about it. Now, I've looked at a few in the United States, like the George Gascon and others. There's all across the US. There's district attorneys and so on now that are pledged, and a lot of these people have to be voted in, by the way, but have pledged to reform the justice system. I'm a little surprised that they win the elections as much as or as often as they do, but when they're backed by some of them are backed by quite serious money. In district attorney terms, spending $100,000 is a huge sum in most district attorney races. In fact, it's nearly all of them. But some of these district attorney to be elected, they're being given $250,000, $500,000, which again for a district attorney election is a monumental sum of money. And so some of them are getting over the line, or many of them, in fact, are getting over the line, provided they've got the right ideological sort of views. They're getting this money. And again, whether it be from Soros or the other, primarily Jewish NGOs, and the Jewish diaspora, the activist diaspora, is very committed to what they see as justice reform, which is really how to make Gentile society completely dysfunctional. But let's have a look at. I listened to some of the speeches that were made by some of these people before, during their campaign to get the job or get elected, and some of it sounds fairly reasonable, and you struggle really to object. They'd say, well, why, if somebody's got an ounce or two of marijuana, should they go to prison? I mean, like, wow, what's the point of sending someone like that to prison? Even if they are a second-time offender or third-time offender, those people should maybe get a bit of drug counselling or go to a drug rehab place. And so the community's money or the taxpayers' money is better spent by trying to rehabilitate them and get them to change their ways rather than throwing them in prison. Now, just on the face of that, that's okay. Look, hey, that seems reasonable enough. Now, the reality is far more nuanced, but just on the face of that alone, why should we put people in prison who've only got a couple of ounces of marijuana? Why should we do? If someone's got a couple of tablets of whatever drug, I don't know, fentanyl or something, if someone's got a couple of those, then why is that prison? Why don't we send them to rehab? Why don't we put them to community service? Why don't we assign a social worker to spend, or a psychologist or something like that, to spend a couple of hours a day changing their habits? And again, you look at that and you say, well, gee, that sounds reasonable enough. But that's not how the real world sort of functions. And these people know it full well, be they ideological fanatics or not. They know it full well. That's not their mission as they come in. Sure, maybe they've got a few reforms in mind, but the reforms aren't to solve problems. They're to pass problems around, to push them off into other places rather than to deal with them. Now, I just want to have a look at a a few things here. Now, there's one I'm looking at. This is a US district attorney. Now, here are some of the things that this is a woman, lesbian. Now, what she's done is she's effectively, because a lot of people are going to prison for misdemeanors, but only because they're career criminals, not because they spat on the sidewalk for the first time and then they got thrown in prison. That's not how it is. Although that's how in her speeches she depicts it, that people are doing the most minor things, such as spitting on the sidewalk and getting prison terms, and that's absurd. But for misdemeanors, if someone's a career criminal, they are still going to prison because they're on parole or they're on bail, or these sorts of things. So say somebody is committed murder and they're out on parole or they're out on bail, and then they're associating with known other murderers, for example, other murderers. Now, that's strictly forbidden under the terms of the parole or the bail, and they still did it. So that means they would go to prison. Now, even though the offence in itself is a misdemeanor, it's part of the conditions of bail or, again, parole, that they behave in a certain. So there's already attempts to control or influence this person's behaviour, and they're not adhering to that. So this is something that the district attorneys aren't explaining. So by passing them off to a social worker or a psychologist, that still is a reflection of, that's still trying to control that person's behaviour. The only thing is, psychologist doesn't necessarily have the direct authority or the desire to have the person reported as having transgressed their bail conditions. So what this woman's done is she's redefined misdemeanors. So instead of, for example, 2 ounces of marijuana, it's now 10 ounces, for example. So really the thresholds have all been raised. So anyone who's got 9.5 ounces is committing a misdemeanor, whereas before they'd have been classified as a drug dealer. Now, I don't necessarily on the face of it have a problem with that, with the idea of saying, well, if someone's just dealing a little bit of marijuana, is that really an offence to put someone in prison? And if it's their first offence, well, of course not. But again, we're talking career criminals here. So I don't know if someone's repeat offending and so on, maybe prison is a worthwhile undertaking, but I don't know. I'm thinking it would be. So what this prosecutor's done, or this district attorney rather, has done, is just simply raise all the thresholds and levels of misdemeanors, and then is running around crowing about how successful the reforms have been, that fewer people are going into prison. Well, of course, fewer people are going to prison because you've just redefined a whole lot of crimes as not being crimes anymore. It's not tough to. I mean, you could say, well, murder's no longer a crime. Guess what? We haven't arrested anyone or charged them with murder for years now. Well, of course, because murder's not a crime anymore. So by redefining what were crimes as now being misdemeanors or non-crimes, then of course they can change the. But this again has career criminals who are continuing to transgress, career criminals on the street. So you can have someone who's, for example, committed multiple assaults and battery with a deadly weapon, and if they switch their from a real gun to being a plastic gun, it suddenly becomes a misdemeanor and not a crime. These sorts of things, and that changes, of course, the landscape. So it means career criminals go back on the street when really they should be arrested and put in prison. So many crimes, she's changed many crimes now to misdemeanors. Now the governors of the state and all these people could veto these and change. There's a lot of things that the other people in the wider body politic and legal fraternity could do to stop this DA, but they don't. So that means that there's a lot of people who are supporting it, and who are helping her do this work of creating the social division and creating a situation where society becomes unworkable, where social trust is destroyed and no longer exists. Because if you don't trust the police to arrest criminals, Um, and where it's likely if you try and stop a criminal assaulting you or robbing you, something like, or robbing or assaulting, say your family members, then if you do that, then it's likely you'll get arrested, not the criminal. And you'll have hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees because the criminal have state legal aid lawyers to represent them, but you've got a job and maybe you've got a house and that sort of thing. So you have to pay. You can't get the free state legal aid. No army of activists is going to be running to help you, you damn white fascist Nazi. So now another scam that they're using is they've changed in this DA, they've changed the threshold of what constitutes mental incompetence. So it seems to be that close to every black person that gets arrested for a crime is deemed by an activist psychologist. And remember, the whole thing is structured with activists here. If there weren't activists in these key jobs before the district attorney came to the office, there is now. So all these so-called psychologists and psychiatrists just rubber stamp the DA's determination to say, yep, that person's mentally incompetent. So that means they can avoid the trials and avoid the examination of the evidence, and particularly avoid any acts of criminality or misdemeanor or anything at all. They say, look, not mentally competent, you're not responsible for what you did. Now, it just so happens that the amount of black people that get this leave pass is quite remarkable. So again, the district attorney can say, well, X amount of black people used to go to prison every year or month or whatever it was. We can now say that that's been reduced by 70%, but it hasn't been reduced by 70%. What's happened is they've just reframed the circumstances and conditions of determining if a crime was committed, or in this case, whether someone's competent to be aware that they did commit a crime. So there's some, well, black people don't actually know. But it's all steeped in this ideology of, well, black people are an oppressed class. They don't have to be responsible for what they do. Slavery, yeah. Therefore, we can say they're not mentally competent, which is a way of saying they're oppressed, and this is our way of compensating them. So okay, all right then. Well, that's it. But again, there are a whole bunch of so there are psychologists and psychiatrists being employed, who've also done the gender studies, are also in the woke activist class. Full well that everyone, that they're saying people are mentally incompetent to be aware of what they did, and they're lying, absolutely lying their asses off in order to come up with this. But that's part of the ideology of what these district attorneys are doing. So really, these criminals, be they career criminals or not, and most of them are simply going back on the street because an official person ticked a box on a form that said that you're not mentally competent to know what you did. And then that automatically puts them into another pool where they're automatically bailed without having to put any money up. Which means they can get it because hardly any bail outfits will touch them. So they get out. So then they're back on the street. So this career criminal is suddenly back on the street because of a sequence of events that are all structured around insane ideology rather than any facts or any reality. Now this is a problem because say a black person with a gun attacks a white person has a gun and shoots back, then it's likely the white person will be arrested. So these DAs have a view of social power is in itself a crime. Lack of social power is a leave pass to say that you either didn't commit the crime, you didn't know you were committing a crime, or even if you did, you shouldn't be held responsible. So we've got those ideologies rolling background. Now there's also other things that this particular district attorney anyway is doing, but I've seen this in other areas where any shooting involving a white person shooting a black person or discharging a gun near a black person or anything like that must automatically be reviewed for by civil rights activists, not just lawyers, but civil rights activist lawyers who were there to find damn fascist fucking Nazi white boy. Let's get him. Very much focused on the view and the grotesque untruth that white people are running around shooting black people all over the place. That's an outrageous absurdity. But nonetheless, these activists are coming in with this view that tens of thousands, millions, possibly hundreds of millions, no, billions of black people are being murdered just in Los Angeles every day by damn fucking fascist, fucking white supremacist Nazis. And so they come, these civil rights activist lawyers, and here's a shooting of maybe it's a white cop and a black suspect, or a white citizen and a black citizen. So their job is in effect to find something, anything that suggests or implies that there was any hint of racism or anything of that nature. Now, if we go back to the Rodney King case in Los Angeles, must be getting on for 30 years ago now. Rodney King was committed a number of crimes. He was not unknown to the police, and police tried to pull him over. He'd had too much to drink, as I recall, and then he tried to drive off at high speed. When they eventually police caught him, he refused to accept their directions, and they struggled. He wouldn't be handcuffed, and I understand he'd been on taking drugs and that sort of thing. So when the case came to court, no one really disputed the facts. The race hustler lawyers for Mr. King really didn't try and launch any defence against the facts. There was a bit of skirmishing on that, but effectively they accepted that it was recorded. A lot of it was recorded on camera. But their argument was that the police were unnecessarily heavy-handed. They accepted King's struggle. They accepted King refused to accept his the police direction, and that he refused handcuffs. They accepted all that. They said, but you went a little bit over the top, and that's because you're damn fascist white Nazi racists. And so that became the whole angle of the case, that there was racism involved. And that really redefined legal practice in the United States and in some cases elsewhere in the world. So that's where these civil rights lawyers come in, that if a white person's involved in a shooting or something like that, then they're there to find the slightest, tiniest morsel of, was it racism? Was racism part of the deal? Was there some sort of prejudicial activity, and so on? So even if the black person is a career criminal, and even if they were committing or had just committed a crime, that doesn't allow the white person to be acting in support of the law, because they may have been influenced by racism. And this is where the civil, and it's all ideological. The civil rights lawyers don't really have to prove there was racism. Once they go after the white guy, he has to prove that he wasn't racist, and has to do so at his own expense. I mean, he could be bankrupted in the process, whereas the government and the taxpayer pays all the legal fees to go after the white guy and crush him. And that's the intention of these civil rights lawyers, by the way, to go crush the white guy. It's not their intention to get justice or any of that sort. And that's part of what this district attorney is doing. So automatically, if there's a case involving a white guy, it automatically has to be an army of civil rights lawyers climb all over it, and the guy typically is going to be indicted in front of a grand jury. So the average citizen is going to be bankrupted just by this, and that this is before any evidence exists against them. It's just a natural administrative process of the district attorney's department that they do this. Now, it's all administrative to them. Everything's already paid for. You know, the lawyers, they're already on staff. To them, whether it's a misuse of their resources can be argued, but it's already paid for. They've already then got another budget to use outside activist lawyer groups. So it's all paid for. It's all built into the wider budget and the costing of running that department. But the citizen that they grab hold of, just arbitrarily, the white citizen they just randomly grab hold of, he's fucked, because he's got to pay, unless he's rich, he's got to pay for the whole thing out of his own pocket. Now, most people are going to be bankrupted by a few $100,000 in legal fees. Most people can't fight their own case. But if someone's got enough money to fight back, they're well off, or they're a lawyer, for example, or they're just particularly skilled at fighting it in court. These guys back off. They're only looking for the easy victims, people they can just beat the shit out of, white guys they can beat. They're not looking for the white guys going, oh yeah, I'll see you in court, motherfucker. They're not looking for that. They don't want to fight. They want a victim that they again can trample all over. I suppose if the white guy really got up their nose, they may decide to put spend the next 3 months budget on going after him, but probably not. Now, but all this activism and this infecting the whole process with activists, if you're a white guy, effectively the burden of proof is reversed. You have to prove you're not a racist when you're dragged into court. They haven't even you're not even guilty of a crime at this point. They can just say that it was, or could have been, or there needs to be an investigation or a grand jury. So you're getting dragged through a long process, very expensive process, very time consuming, huge amount of stress, just because you're white, for goodness sake. That's the extent of the activism. So now I just want to sort of comment on most sensible people now are deeply concerned that if somebody who's supposed to not ideologically supposed to not have social power, the police aren't really, nor are the prosecution department, interested in arresting them or pursuing them or anything like that. But if you have social power, again, as determined ideologically, then the chances are you're going to be pursued vigorously. Now, the police have been so politicised now, and departments of prosecution so politicised, that effectively the police don't do anything until they're told, micromanaged by the Department of Prosecution, and they, the call will come into the police station and say, get an officer to go out and do this and do that. Now, that wasn't how it used to be. Only the big ticket stuff used to, but now, because of this social power concept and what constitutes criminality, for example, misgendering somebody. So the police are now micromanaged to that extent, where they're simply enforcers of the globalist project. Now, it may vary to varying degrees depending on who the district attorney is or who the police chief is. So you have some sort of dynamic factors at play there. But effectively, this is it now. The politicisation, the ideological politicisation of police forces and district attorneys and indeed judges and justice systems generally. I mean, look at Merrick Garland in the United States. For fuck's sake, you couldn't get a more activist hack goon if you tried. And to think they were going to put him on the Supreme Court of the United States is insane. So this is, when all this is happening, I for example, now have very little confidence that crimes will be pursued, punished, and prosecuted on the sheer merit of the crime itself. I'm now of the view, and convinced actually, that the ideology, the woke ideology, the globalist ideology, call it what you like, that now determines everything, social power and scales of oppression and totem poles of power and this sort of thing, that this is going to be, this is in fact how justice is now being administered. And you see it in rape cases, for example, where she says, he raped me, no evidence, no physical evidence, nothing at all, nothing. And yet the the Department of Prosecutions will choose to prosecute that. When it's found that she was lying and was found to do so under oath multiple times, typically a Department of Prosecutions, or certainly in the past, would go after such a person for committing perjury in a court of law. They don't. No, if you don't have much social power, they don't care anymore. If you're the so-called oppressed class, you're the black lesbian, it doesn't matter, because you don't tell lies. You just convey your lived experience, and therefore that's not a lie. Whereas if you're a white person, straight white male, then you have social power. Therefore, you are accountable for telling lies, and they will go after you for committing perjury. So this is the insanity of the justice system at the moment, and this is what's creating, I think, a huge factor in social division. We're all of us losing respect for this, the justice, the FBI, the prosecutions, the judges, the courts, district attorneys. We're all losing respect, or many of us are at least, losing respect for these institutions, or particularly the people in them and the things they do. And that is creating a level of social division, quite apart from the fact that career criminals can now roam the streets unaccountable for the crimes they commit. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.